talk a little bit about the Christmas period and a little bit around socializing as well. And also masking. I think there's definitely more presence around Christmas, and while I was around people, but there was, I feel, maybe a gap of understanding that I don't think can be bridged unless it's, if it can, or if it does happen, it will be very slow and very gradual. And I think in my mind I want to impart that sort of whatever understanding I have of myself, especially around autism and what I'm learning, impart that to people so they can know that perhaps I'm not being detached, or I'm not being rude, or because it can definitely come across that way. Or I don't mean that all the time, but oftentimes in reflection, like when I'm looking back in the last couple of days, I feel there's moments where, especially around family, thinking, I should have maybe engaged with that person more, or struck up more conversation, when of course I was in that time doing my best to survive. I think one thing that's really tricky that I find once I'm around people, it's really difficult to be self-aware. I think I did well where for many moments of the day I was sort of in some light way checking in with myself, whether that meant if I was sort of talking too much and overwhelming myself and unable to sort of quieten down, or able to take a little bit of rest, if it's like watching TV with company. But on one hand, it doesn't feel enough. It still feels very sort of overwhelming. And I think socializing anyway, I'm finding communication, expressing what I want to say, more and more difficult, more and more clumsy. Feels like I'm losing more and more nuance to explaining things, or to being sort of socially trying to think how to phrase it, or socially adept. Not sure if that's using that word correctly. But yeah, I can often feel that I'm losing that more and more, and I'm less aware of what I'm saying, or this is less sort of maybe control of what I'm saying. And with that, it makes sort of socializing and communicating very unenjoyable. It makes it more stressful in an area that's already stressful or that has a kind of heavy load to it, that has tension, that has expectation and pressure to engage in a certain way. It's very hard to get a balanced perspective on, oh, this is okay if I'm, in general terms, if I'm sort of spending this much time alone and sort of this much time like visiting family or socially. I think what I'm using more and more now is trying to use sort of just my, I guess you can call it inner feelings or intuition. And I don't mean that in like a very accurate and clear way, but just sort of relying on that a little bit more. And it's sort of trusting that maybe I'll talk more about this kind of on the spiritual side of things in like a podcast episode on my other channel. But yeah, it's kind of trusting in life, I guess, that things will be looked after. Yeah, as long as in this space, I guess, of being connected to that, being connected to being sort of present and not lost in my thoughts or lost in fear. This is a natural thing of masking, but it feels when I'm in those situations, and often there's no space to sort of stim. Even that word feels foreign. There's no space to sort of calm myself down, in another way of putting it, whether it's sort of rubbing apart my body like my arms, or I think my common sort of thing is to squeeze my fingers or to kind of interlace my fingers or hold my fingers. And it could probably look a bit odd me doing that, but feeling some pressure and something that's kind of my current go-to, that kind of naturally happens. And also it's less conspicuous than like if I was to rub my head or like top of my head or rub my forehead, which I do often when I'm very overwhelmed or more overwhelmed than just generally overwhelmed. I'm sure maybe more of this will become a bit clearer by reading that book called Unmasked that I haven't gone back to yet. Yeah, and I think just talking about masking in general, it can feel, even to myself, it can feel shocking that I have to do this, that I have to sort of cope with these new or these more uncovered sort of challenges, whether it's socially or any social interaction, quite frankly, whether it's kind of ordering a cup of coffee or even saying, if someone on the street is trying to sell me something, to sort of disengage in that is quite stressful. And or someone asking for help. And sort of in the old days, I would engage in that aspect. If someone who needed some food or something, I would be able to sort of ask what they wanted, and it just feels so much socially, it's sort of getting more and more restricted. It's something I'm aware of. I'm just thinking in this moment what I need, and perhaps what I need is, number one, more, I guess, awareness of autistic stuff, which is so general, but things like the Unmasked book, sort of general understanding of that sort of place of sort of as an adult, getting that diagnosis, and then not just that, but dealing with more and more intense sort of symptoms of things that have been ignored, and also maybe YouTube channels like other autistics, and this may sound a bit funny, but not to like study how they're acting, but to maybe see people who are not masking, and maybe that will help in some way. So I may try and search sort of content creators, like autistic content creators, and just, these feel like two kind of safe ways to do that. In the past, I did think about trying to join more sort of autistic sort of groups, like in-person groups, but I don't think there's a huge amount of stuff out there, and obviously with the challenge of the sensory side of things, with with holding a conversation, and that affecting me makes that very challenging. And then there's like the long COVID side of things, where that sort of blends in, that makes everything, I'm sure in a pervasive way, that touches everything, that probably makes my socializing even harder, to just, as well as the sensory side, and of course some of it overlaps and blends together, but just processing conversation and dealing with that fatigue and that the slowness, I guess, the heaviness of knowing what to say, and to almost, I guess, surf the waves of a conversation. They were in that sort of place between Christmas and New Year's, where it can feel a little bit, right now it feels a bit harder to kind of get started on things. Like for me, it would be the library, knowing that perhaps it's open for a couple of days, then it will be closed again for New Year's. So it feels almost like a mini sort of hibernation. But And just jumping back to masking as well, it's so tough to express to people around me of how difficult things are. And unless I'm observed as being really distressed or really sort of, then yeah, I feel like sometimes it's so difficult to be understood, especially when it's preconceived views about things, and there isn't any room for that to sort of change. And just part of that is just human beings, I guess, and I can imagine there's very few people that may have a sense of sort of openness, and I don't mean that in a people are nice, people are not nice, but sort of an educated openness about challenging emotional difficulties, neurodivergence, and I feel like that the people who are probably those going through it or going through something similar, where there's a natural almost inclination to not, or a natural inclination to be in a place of I don't know what it's like for you, or what you're describing is probably just a fraction of what your experience is. For instance, when people relay to me that I'm not doing too good, or if there's a bit of a softener in there when they're sort of saying it's a little bit difficult, automatically, and part of me is aware this may not always be true for them, but a good part of me is thinking it's probably bloody difficult for you. You're probably in a really tough spot, or it was a really tough situation, and that was kind of your social way of saying it, and that's just because of obviously my own sort of daily difficulties and challenges. So just think if there's anything else I want to share. And it's nice just to take a moment and kind of like that in sort of in-person counselling, where you can just take a breather for a few moments, and it's almost like an allowed process. And I feel like in life nowadays, even if things like recording this video or when you're speaking to someone, it feels like there's no silence allowed. So I quite like just being able to almost breathe on this, recording this, and not feeling I have to fill every second, which would be impossible for me anyway at this point. But so coming up in New Year's, there's a few more families sort of time that's going to be spent then. So just kind of maybe acknowledging that I can take what I'm learning, because it feels like a steep learning curve as I learn about myself and these sort of, in some ways, new challenges, and how I can sort of best support myself in those environments. And of course, there's a balance of not being too hard on myself. Like, for instance, the mention of me not perhaps of engaging with a specific, with this person as much as I thought I should do. It's kind of, on one hand, that's an observation, but not to make that a criticism. So maybe just a noting for the future that perhaps I could, even if it's for a short interaction, but just the rest of the evening tonight I'm just going to do some reading, starting a new book, which is always a little bit tricky. It can feel a bit heavy to do sometimes to get a book started. I've taken some magnesium tonight. I've taken 1 magnesium and some vitamin C because I was getting a bit of a cold. Almost body feels like it's fighting off a cold. So so I'm all set for bed. And as per usual, it feels like there's so much more I want to say and express, but knowing that, this is one of the challenges of communication right now for me and this stuff. But remember those intentions, so the autism book, and also more readily that maybe some sort of looking at like autistic YouTube channels, and I think that will help.